Dr. Yi-wen Chen. She is from the Children's National Health System, formerly called the Children's National Hospital, and George Washington University. And she's here to describe an international multi-center study on infantile-onset facioscapular neuromuscular dystrophy. Welcome, Yi-wen.
Thank you, Joan. Hi, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me to talk to you about our clinical studies in infantile form of FSHD. Please feel free while you're having lunch, and please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. I'd like this to be a discussion. And if you have any comments and questions, just let me know. So the study is chaired by Dr. Jean Ma at Bergam Children's Hospital, Canada. She's a neurologist with extensive experience in clinical studies and an expert in neuromuscular diseases. Now, I'm the co-chair of the study with a background in veterinary medicine and a PhD in molecular genetics. I'm a basic science researcher, and I've been interested in studying the disease mechanisms of FSHD in the past years. As we know that there's a lot of findings recently, and we know the disease mechanism is much, much better at this point. So we actually put in more effort in finding testing potential treatments, and also look for biomarkers that can potentially be used as surrogate markers to evaluate treatment efficacy in future clinical studies, and also this clinical studies on the infantile form of FSHD. So the study is conducted by the Cooperative International Neuromuscular Research Group, brief as Synergy, and I will talk about this. I will talk about this research network in more details later. So before we talk about the study, I'd just like to give a very, very quick review of the disease mechanisms and also a little bit background of infantile form of FSHD. Please stop me if there's any question. So as we all know that majority of patients with FSHD have a deletion in the B4Z4 repeat region. And in triangle here, I represent one repeat. So, and it is located at the very near the end of the long arm of chromosome 4. And in unaffected individuals, we have from 11 to 100 repeats. And in patients with FSHD, the repeat is deleted, or we call the region is contracted. And then we have from 1 to 10 copies of the repeat. So it is believed that this contraction of the repeats actually affects the chromatin structure of the region, and as a consequence, the genes in the region that are not supposed to be expressed actually expressed. So this is actually a figure to briefly talk about the chromatin, different type of chromatin structures in our cells. So imagine, so these are the spread line. The gray red basically is our DNA. So imagine the DNA is like a very, very long and narrow scroll of attachments. And other genetic information is basically written on that. And when we talk about genes, we usually think about genes that actually code a protein. The proteins that's actually very important in our cells actually perform all different functions in our cells. But the protein coding genes actually only occupy 1% of the whole genome. So there are actually a lot of other sequences in our genome that we may not need, and sometimes contain sequences that's harmful to us, and or the sequences that's rarely used. We use them sometimes at a specific stage of development, and the specific type of tissues, but we don't use them all the time. For the genes we use very often, and we need to use them, they usually are packed into a relatively loose, organized way. So these DNA actually basically wrap around these ball-like structure. These are protein complex, and they basically wrap around them, but it's relatively loose. So it actually allows transcriptional machineries to have access to the region. And if you imagine the genes in the DNA is a blueprint of your proteins, then the transcriptional machinery is like a copy machine. So basically, go to the site, make a copy of the information, and then it's called messenger RNAs. And then take these messenger RNAs, actually will be shipped to the factory that's making protein. And to allow the access of these copy machines, the DNA actually is arranged in a relatively loose manner. And for the genes that we don't need to use right away, or some sequences we really don't like them to be dangling around, we actually make them into a very compact structure, and these are called heterochromatin. So basically, euchromatin is the regions that usually have active genes, and these genes are expressed, sometimes regulated by different mechanisms. And the heterochromatin is the regions that have relatively fewer genes, or genes that you only use at a specific stage for different specific tissue. So this is an example of how the structure of chromatin actually can affect the gene expression. I don't know if you know what these are. Do you know what they are? These are the close-up of the eyes of fruit flies. So the fruit flies has been very commonly used to study genetic diseases or conditions because it's very easy to raise them, and you can have a lot for experiments, and they actually share a lot of genes with us. Sometimes very similar regulatory ways and mechanisms. So in this case, as you can see, that's a close-up of the eyes, and the eyes actually have its color. And the gene that actually makes the color is in the euchromatic region, so it's a euchromatin, and it's far away from the heterochromatin. But if a genetic event brings the gene close to the heterochromatin, then there is a possibility the heterochromatin actually is spread through and actually covers the region actually the gene is located. In this case, the gene becomes inactive. If a cell has a chromatin that the gene is sitting in this inactivated region, then the cell won't make pigment of the eyes. So if you look at this picture, you can see all these white areas. These are actually the cells that are not making the pigment. So the gene is not expressed. But then if you look at some cells actually is making the pigment here, the red part, that in those cells, the gene is sitting here, the same location, but it's not in the heterochromatic region. So the gene actually can express. So the very important message here is, even though the gene is completely normal and it's completely the same in all different cells, but if you have a different type of chromatin structure, that's where the gene is located, then the gene may be turned off. And also, it can be active, so it really depends on one kind. So it's a little bit similar in the case of FSHD. It's opposite in a way because in the population that's not affected, usually this region, the D4C4 region, as you can see, I put the black there, is considered a more condensed chromatin, more like heterochromatin. So the genes in this region actually is not expressed. And when we have a contraction of this repeat region, when we have fewer repeats, for some reason, they actually change the chromatin. There are a lot of studies on what's the mechanism, but basically the chromatin structure changed and it becomes more loose. And so the genes inside this region can be expressed. Yes?
Is that dynamic or is that fixed per person? Does it change over time, or?
It's a very good question, actually. I think usually a lot of these structures are fixed. However, in patients, I don't really think there's a study specifically to study if actually it can change during the lifetime. But it's definitely something for people who's studying epigenetics are interested in. And I know there are studies actually ongoing on these type of things. But I remember there's a study done by Dr. Peter Jones. I think he actually mentioned about, in the patients, the chromatin structure is probably more loose than the carriers that doesn't really have a symptom at that point. So whether this is something can be changed dynamically, that's still not clear. But it actually suggests it may be. I think it is. So, so then once the area is opened up, then the genes, the messenger RNA, we talked about the copies from the blueprints actually can be made. And there's another important factor, it's called polyadenylation. I think you probably heard of it. So that's actually a step during the transcription. Your cell try to mark the messenger RNA, say this is something we really need. It's useful. We want to use it to make protein out of it. And if the RNA, once it's made, is not marked by polyadenylation, they usually are degraded very fast. So they will be just removed like that. So what happened is in most repeats, it seems that these are made, but it's not polyadenylated, so they are degraded very fast. But in the last repeat, actually there is a polyadenylation signal beyond the last repeat to tell the cells to attach a mark on your messenger RNA. So what happened is that these RNA will be moved to the ribosomes to make protein. So what this is telling us is if an individual have the contraction, but with a change at the polyadenylation signal location, then the DOX4 transcripts mRNA may not be marked as something need to be used to make protein, then this individual may not have FSHD. Usually the patient will have both a contraction of this region as well as a functional polyadenylation signal, and then will allow a toxic DOX4 protein to be made, and that causes disease. So recently there's it's a mutation in this FSHD1 gene has been reported to be the cause of the FSHD2. And in this case, one of the allele means we get two chromosomes, one from dad and one from mom. So one of them has a mutation, and that in this case, the patient cannot make enough of these proteins. And somehow that actually also affects the epigenetic state in this area, and actually make the chromatin more opened and can be accessed by the transcription machinery, and then that's what can be made in this case, and then cause disease. So in these patients, we don't need to have the repeat contraction, actually missing half of the protein actually, and have the same effect. Okay, so now the next question is, if we have a different size of repeat, will that actually affect how early the disease will be developed and how severe the disease will be? So based on this study and some other later studies, the answer is partial yes. So it seems there's a correlation between the size of the D4Z4 fragment and the age of onset. So this basically shows you that the horizontal axis indicate the D4Z4 size, and then the y-axis is the age of onset. And if you look at this area, you're going to see that most of the patients, if they show symptoms younger than before they are age of 5, they usually have their repeat size in this range. So that's basically less than 20 kilobase. and it's equivalent to roughly 3 repeats. However, if you look at these patients, so here, so these patients also have relatively short repeats, but they didn't develop any symptoms until much older. So this individual is almost 20. So that basically just tell you, based on the research, there is a correlation between repeat size and age, but it doesn't really predict for each individual whether you're going to have a disease early or late.
There's a question.
Yes.
How is age of onset defined? Because I know for a lot of us we've had same symptoms since birth. So is it when it affects your legs?
So I think in this study it's just defined to have a first sign of weakness. So usually it's facial. So the same study also showed that it seems also the disease will become more severe for the patients who has smaller repeat size for the clinic. The horizontal axis is again the size of repeat, and this is the age. They use the first use of wheelchair as an indicator of the severity. So it seems that this group of patients with a smaller repeat size may actually use wheelchair at an earlier age. But, again, it's not always true for everybody, because if you look at these groups of patients, it's the same thing. They have short repeat size, but they actually didn't need to use that wheelchair so much. So this basically just tells us there's a huge variations in terms of clinical presentations, even though if different individuals have the same repeat number. So as we just look at, there are individual patients, especially the ones with a smaller repeat, tend to have developed clinical symptoms early. So so the infantile onset of FSHD was first defined by Dr. Brower and colleagues in 1994, and in the study they defined this subgroup of patients as facial weakness, show facial weakness younger than 5 years old, and then it showed a girdle weakness younger than 10. And what happened in this group of patients is they usually develop more severe muscle symptoms, and also there's a higher chance they may need to use wheelchair in this case. And also there are several non-muscle phenotypes, non-muscle symptoms, so such as retinal vasculopathy. This is the disease changes in the blood vessels in the retina of eyes. And so there's a picture here. I don't know if you can see it.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah. I'm not sure which of these buttons doesn't know what I'm pressing. There we go.
Okay, so I don't know if you can see that better, but these are both are from it's the blood vessels at the bottom of the eyes from patients. Both of them are patients. But if you look at this one, the blood vessel is more straight and branched out. If you look at that one and then compare this one, you can clearly tell the difference. The blood vessel movement. So it's very curvy and wiggling there. So can you see that? Yeah.
It's still pretty dark. Can you bring the lights up?
Bring the lights up?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
all we see is a silhouette here.
Oh.
Yes. I think that's fine. I think we can. Thank you. Okay. So yeah. So what happened is sometimes it becomes very severe, and the blood vessel become leaky, the fluid, and sometimes blood will come out and actually cause vision problems. And so it is important for this to be detected early and treated. And the other the other symptom is sensory neuronal hearing loss. We know a lot of patients have a subclinical hearing loss, but in this group of patients, there are higher chance they will have severe sensory neuronal hearing loss. And especially for younger children, if there's such a problem, they also affect their speech development. So it is important to identify early and receive treatment. The last is epilepsy and mental retardation and developmental delay. Usually these have been reported, but it's relatively rare in the patient population. Do you have any questions? So because this specific population is rare, it's about estimated 4% of the whole FSHD patient population. So the studies in the past have been really using relatively small number of patients to conclude different specific aspects about this disease. The goal of this clinical study is to enroll a relatively larger number of cohort. So we aim at 50 patients, and we would like to use the data collected to understand the clinical presentation of this specific population a little bit better. At the same time, I would like to use this opportunity to establish standardized muscle testing protocol, including both manual and quantitative measure. And the last, we like to evaluate the impact of physical impairment, secondary health conditions, activity limitations, and disability caused by FSHD, and also health-related quality of life concerns at different age groups that have an infantile form of FSHD. We think this will really help us to understand this specific population very well, probably as well as the FSHD as a group. In addition to clinical examinations, we also provide the option to let us collect the blood samples from the patients. This is actually the part I've been involved the most, and actually, to me, I think this probably is the most important part. So the goal is to understand, to use the samples to understand the genetic, to identify potential genetic modifiers of the disease. So we know that even with the same repeat numbers, different individuals can have very different clinical presentations in terms of disease onset and severity. We want to take a look at gene activities at the whole genome level from the samples collected from different individuals. So even though if you have the same size of repeats, if you're more severe and this individual is milder, we'd like to know what's the differences at a molecular level. And maybe that information will provide insight of why different individuals have different disease age of onset or severity. And the second thing we like to do is actually to explore the possibility to identify biomarkers for the disease. So as we know, the disease, muscular dystrophy and FSHD is relatively slow in progression. So if we are going to have any clinical trial, I don't know if Catherine is going to mention about this later, it may take much longer time to actually see from the point to treat the patients with specific compounds to the point to actually see the improvement of muscle function. So the goal to identify biomarkers is really to identify a gene or protein, or group of genes and proteins that can help us to evaluate the treatment efficacy. So if there is a specific protein or RNA, messenger RNA or mRNA that actually respond to your treatment quickly and actually let you make you understand that, oh, this is probably is going to benefit, then we can design a longer trial to actually just test the compound and then to see whether we can improve muscle function. So the study is conducted by the Synergy Group, as I mentioned earlier. So it's funded in 1999 at the Children's National Health System. It's a multidisciplinary and cross-institutional network of clinicians and scientists who are interested in understanding this disease more and also try to develop treatments for these neuromuscular diseases. The study includes the causes of the diseases, the pathogenesis, and clinical outcomes of neuromuscular disorders, and also conduct well-controlled clinical trials. The web address is the Synergy Group is physically located at the Children's National Medical Center, and the directors are Dr. Gunn for coordinating, and the medical director is Dr. Clemens, and the scientific director is Dr. Eric. And there are 10 studies have been completed by the Synergy Group, and as you can see, many of them are trials for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and there's one for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and some of the others are studying different muscle testing, and I think several of them have been published, and the last few are in the stage of manuscript preparation. There are 6 ongoing trials at this point, and this infantile form FSHD study is one of the 6. And the Synergy Group involved clinical research network involving 27 sites, domestically and internationally. All centers participated in this network are major neuromuscular referral centers. And the last census show that there are roughly 500 patients with FSHD are seeing physicians at one of the centers. And these are the locations of each of these centers. And the ones that circled are the ones actually participating in this specific clinical study. There are a few of them. I assume most of you are coming from this area. So there are a few of them are in this area. The Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and there's University of Pittsburgh. And I think there are a couple at North Carolina, Carolina's Medical Center, and Duke Medical Center. So for each participation site, there is a PI who is coordinating and supervising all the studies taking place at the site. And CMC has one site, and Dr. Thangaraj is here today, the site PI at the Children's. So if you'd like to talk to her, talk to me afterwards, you're welcome to do that. And we, in addition to principal investigator, we have a clinical research coordinator to coordinate the study visits, and 2 physical therapists at each site who are trained centrally and certified as clinical evaluators for the Synergy, and they also perform the quantitative measured system tests. So the CQMS, I'll just give you a quick overview of that. So basically, it's a quantitative measurement of the muscle strength, muscle functions, and there are over 50 physical therapists scattered out in all centers are certified to do this task. The goal is really try to get a consistent measurement at different sites so the data can be actually grouped together and compared later. And other equipment are standardized. And also we have, because we have pediatric patients, so we actually have some, for example, in this case, when the child is pulling hard, we actually have a laptop here to show the child's two racing cars. So the harder he pulls, the faster the car will go. So to encourage this individual actually pull as hard as he can. So, so the study is, the goal is to recruit 50 participants for the infantile onset FSHD across all centers, and each site at least 3, hopefully. And we of course encourage more enrollments. And a few weeks ago when I was in Boston, I told, I don't know if any of you were in Boston where you listened to them, but I told you we have 34 enrolled at this point, and today we have 39. So we have 11 more to go. So the goal is actually to have enough participants by the end of the year.
That enrolled pretty quickly, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I think at the beginning, because we were really preparing IRBs and a lot of set up the sites and training to make sure all the sites are ready. So, you know, at this point, we are really ready, and we actually also receive a lot of help from you also. I know you have been referring. Thank you.
Well,
and also from the society.
Yeah, it's the FSH community. Any study you want to do in FSH rules like that.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, we have a lot of people spread the words, and that's actually really helped for this to speed up. So, definitely. So the criteria is the presence of all the following are the criteria for enrollment. So basically, the individual have a facial or shoulder girdle muscle weakness, and we're younger than 10 years old. If it's a familial cases, autosomal dominant, and a contraction of equals equal to 1 to 10 repeats. So in any case, if individual that have a severe cardiac problems and they cannot complete the test, or there's evidence that probably this individual does not have FSHD, or there's any other situation that if the investigator thinks this participant may not be able to complete, that's the only time when this individual may not participate in this study. So the study assessment includes physician's assessments. That's the basic, similar to physical examination, and with a neurological examination too, medical history, and vital signs, these type of things. And then cognitive assessments. These are specially designed for different age groups. So the patient needs to be at least 6 years old to participate. And then we have questionnaires for, well, we have tests actually for 6 to 17 years old, and then from 6 to 16, and then from 17 and above, it's a different set of tests. And after cognitive assessment, we have standardized self-administered questionnaires, and these can be actually done online. And it will be asking about the disabilities and how the quality of life is affected, and so the questions about how the disease affects you in general. And then there will be clinical evaluator assessment. So this can be done on site or at home. And then this is the part we just talked about, the muscle functional test and strength test. And they are also age specific. So all of these are age specific. For these, if it's a very young child, the parents will fill out specific forms. If it's older, the parents will help part, and the individual will fill the rest. And then for the adults, they will fill out other questions. If the participant sites has the capacity to perform these tests, then they are required to perform them. So because as we talked about, it's very important for this specific disease group. So the hearing assessment will be conducted, and the vision, and also speech assessment. The last is blood samples. As I mentioned earlier, that's for biomarker explorers. So all the samples are entered real time, so that we use Open Clinica, and each site, the physician or physical therapist will enter all the information on site, and then it will be all collected at a central location that will be at Children's Hospital in DC. And for the eye exam, speech, audiology, and cognitive tests, they will be sent to the specific sites for evaluation. So all the vision, the data related to vision will be evaluated by Dr. Embry at Children's, and then speech will be evaluated by Dr. Hodge at University of Alberta, and then audiology data will be evaluated by Dr. Dormer at the University of Pittsburgh, and the cognitive data will be evaluated by Dr. Haley. So by doing that, then all the data is evaluated by one person to avoid bias. Okay, so the funding. So when how do we actually started this study? We actually was responding to one of RFA request for application posted by FSH Society to study infantile form of FSHD, and that's how we started it. And then afterwards, we also received funding from Muscular Dystrophy Canada, and then FSH Global Research Foundation to support the study. We actually just recently heard from FSH Global Foundation that they will support us 1 year funding for a second visit. So what we're trying to do at this point is actually first have a longitudinal data that will actually involve a second or even third visit from the participants. This is very, very important and critical because it is very important for us to understand what happens during the period of time, how the disease progresses. If it's moving fast, slow, or it's very various, depending on the individual. Does your genetic mutation actually affect how you progress? So these type of things will not be answered if we don't have longitudinal data. So we are doing our best to try to obtain additional funding to be able to do follow-up visits from the participant. So in addition to the FSG Global, we actually also are trying to apply NIH grants to support second visits. For biomarker exploratory studies, it's also very important to have longitudinal data so we can see if this biomarker is stable, if it actually changed, correlated to the progression of disease. So maybe this will be a good biomarker to actually monitor how disease progresses. Or if this is a biomarker that can be used to evaluate if a treatment actually is effective. So we would like to be able to collect longitudinal data and also for the biomarker exploratory studies. And as I mentioned earlier, there are many things that can be used potentially as biomarkers. So we are actually focusing on the messenger RNA, and also microRNA, that's small RNA, actually regulates activities of messenger RNA, and then proteins and the cytokines in the muscle. We are interested in a non-invasive way of evaluating the disease state of the patient. So we are thinking of studying this population using MRI, but it's really at the early stage. And as I mentioned, that we are testing several potential therapeutic compounds. So we are also thinking of starting pilots and feasibility studies of certain natural compounds by dietary supplementation. Okay, so I'd like to thank all for your attention. And the studies is basically done by the Synergy Group. And it will be impossible without all the participants, including other patients who have enrolled in the study, as well as healthy volunteers, especially in the biomarker studies. We actually also collect blood samples for healthy volunteers, so we can compare what the samples do. And again, the funding agencies, the foundations, FSH Society, Muscular Dystrophy Canada, and the FSHD Global Research Foundation. Thank you. Do you have
any? Just a reminder on questions, we are streaming live, so things, nothing too personal that you wouldn't want to share otherwise.
No bad language?
That's okay.
That's okay. But anything that,
so people are watching.
I guess anything that would identify you, if somebody heard the voice of the question, you might want to be cautious about. But I would also ask if you could repeat the question in the microphone, because it won't pick up the question.
I hope it was okay when I was talking.
We'll
because I keep walking.
So the blood from the participants with infantile-onset FSH, what is your control group? Are you going to compare them to other children or to other people with FSH or both?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yes, we actually.
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the question is, what's the control group we use for comparing the blood samples collected from patients? So because I mentioned that we use blood from healthy volunteers for comparison. So we do match age and gender. So there are all the samples we try to do. So we basically look at what we have in the patient population, because we do have patients with infantile form of FSHD, but when he or she is enrolled, they are in their 50s or 30s. So when we collect control, we specifically look for volunteers that actually are in the same age range and same gender. Especially for some of the biomarkers like cytokine, we know age and gender, and sometimes even physical conditions will affect these molecules. So we try our best.
You mentioned comparing people who had similar length deletions but different age of onset as possibly providing insight into modifying genes. Can you comment on why that's important in terms of treatment discovery or?
Yeah. So so as we know that, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of patients with shoulder disease actually show symptoms earlier and also when we share early, but not everybody, like I pointed out. So the question is, if there is something in those individuals that doesn't show the symptoms that early, actually protecting them from having the symptoms like later, early. So so by comparing their gene expression, we hope to identify the differences that actually can help us to understand the mechanisms why these individuals actually develop early or slower in progression. And then that can, for example, if it's a specific enzyme, that's just an example, then maybe we can modulate the amount of that protein in a patient. And actually, if there's a way to do that, because a lot of enzymes, there's inhibitors, or even protein, there's inhibitors, or there's a way to increase the amount of specific proteins or genes. So to find out what it is the first step, and then we can look for potential ways to actually modulate it. Maybe it can be developed into a treatment.
Another question. So to qualify for the study, you need to have manifested symptoms before the age of 10. Is that 11 or 11? And I imagine a lot of patients don't get formally diagnosed until later. So it might be helpful, and I get questions about that with regard to this study. I was diagnosed when I was 15, but I couldn't run fast when I was 5, whatever. I'm wondering, do you have any sense of, in the world of patients, how many actually, if you would have asked them, how many had these symptoms before the age of 11? Because right now it's that this is a super rare subclass, but maybe they're rare if they actually come to diagnosis. But if you were to ask the population of patients, maybe many more would say they had some of these key symptoms.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we do is we do have a centralized point to actually evaluate this information. But what happens is if you actually are diagnosed a little bit later, like you actually can show, for example, you can have video clips, pictures, and these type of things to show the physician that you actually have these symptoms as early as a certain age, and if that fits criteria, I think they actually will be taken into consideration.
What about something that you couldn't do sit-ups when you had a gym class report card and said you totally got an F in sit-ups?
Well, if it's related to FSH, it's because of FSHD. I think the physician. I know what you mean. So if you just you say that, right? Because there's no evidence. I really don't know. I think this probably need to be really on individual cases, and then talk to the site PI.
So would another way to come at June's question would be, if you think you might qualify, go in and talk to one of these centers and let them evaluate. Don't self-select yourself out.
Exactly. Thank you.
So I can add to that. So what we do is when we know that we have a potential,
Also, yeah. Can you also repeat the topic, the question?
One of the questions that was raised is how can a patient participate in the study and what is the defining inclusion criteria? So I can say as a site PI, what we do is actually patient-reported or parent-reported symptoms. So if they have said, I noticed that my child could not blow out a candle at age 7 or 8, and then some astute physician or a pediatrician captured it on the history, all we need is the parent to support that statement and or a physical sheet of paper. And then if your genetic diagnosis matches, then we would say, go back and question you and say, okay, really the onset was before age 11, so you would qualify. But I think it's extremely variable. If there's a very strong family history, sometimes that they already, they kind of anticipate and they can pick out the symptoms much earlier. So they then tend to kind of know that this child is affected. But when we have seen patients, we have definitely identified at least 3 or 4 at children's where all of these onset of symptoms was before age 11.
What is the age of your actual participants?
So,
you're not looking strictly for children.
No, anyone with symptom onset before age 11. The one participant that we have had at children's is 21. I don't know the age of all the participants of the symptom sites for check.
Yeah, we do have lots of participants that's older. Okay. So we do have more, we have a participant, I would say probably half of the participants that's older than 40 people. So, and we have 15-year-olds participating in the study. So as long as they fit the criteria, no matter what's your current age, you can actually participate.
How many of these participants are family related? Like, is there any, or like my son and I, we both have both signs were there before age 11. Are you doing anything with that where there might be family where one might not have progressed as fast as another?
So your question is how many of these participants are related?
Yes.
So we do have related We have patients who are related to actually participate. We haven't really gone to the point to analyze all the data yet, but so we don't know how many of them actually are. It's not a lot, but we do have them. We do have patients, so it's okay that we can.
It's not an exclusion if you have a child who's affected for you to participate as well.
Yeah, so everybody can participate.
Okay.
What do the when you're doing the examinations and the studies, what does it consist of? Needles, exams. I mean, what do you do? Dietary supplements? What the test is of?
We don't really have any dietary supplement at this point in this specific study, so that's more the next step in the future. That's something we are interested in extending to. At this point, we only the only thing. So the question is, what type of examination we actually do, right? So at this point, like we talked about earlier, so we do first a general physical examination, height, weight, and blood pressures, and what type of medication you're taking. We have neurological examination, and for the muscle functions, there will be specific examination done by physical therapists. For example, if you write down how fast you can stand up, walk the stairs, and a specific distance, how fast you can walk, and there are specific devices ask you to move pins from this location to the other ones and see how fast you can do it, or test how tight you can grip, and these type of things. So for the methods, quantitative measurement I talked about, then you will have they will test your muscle spreads by putting a transducer, a specific device that measure how hard you actually can pull and or move your muscle. They actually test different things. They will also test your leg muscles and how strong your leg muscles are, and testing how hard they can pull. And so these are the examination for the muscle. But for most of the sites, they also will examine your eyes to see if you have those vasculature changes in your eyes, and test your hearing, make sure your hearing is okay. And also, they will test your speech. So you actually are going to record your speech, and there's a special speech pathologist will actually analyze the information. So there are many different, all these things will be done, and they are all done in one day. It's actually a very packed day. Yeah.
So there is no blood work involved, is that?
The blood work is actually is a part of it, but it's optional.
Okay.
So it's very quick.
Do you have to have genetic testing done prior to this?
No. So you mean like before you enroll, do you need to have genetic testing done?
Yes.
You need
Yes.
confirmation of your diagnosis.
So for somebody that they need to have that done, or will you guys do the genetic testing?
So for diagnostic?
I've never had this issue come up, but it should not be a problem if you really think that this we can make that happen.
So just for the people watching, fshlive@gmail.com. If you have any questions, that'll make its way to me. And a question from me would be, you mentioned in your presentation that there's pretty strong evidence that there is some correlation to the deletion size. But then there's this group of people sort of in the middle that belie that trend. Is that a potential different study then, to sort of look at the folks that have a lot of deletions but don't show symptoms till later, because they're specifically excluded from this study, right?
No, they are not excluded.
So it's because they wouldn't have shown symptoms before 11.
Yeah, so if they don't show symptoms before 11, they will not be included in the study. So this specific study actually will only focus on the ones that, in a figure, that will be the ones actually below the
lower left.
threshold. Yeah, below, exactly. So yes, so if an individual carry very small fragments but they didn't show symptoms, they will not be included. But if they show symptoms at an earlier stage, they will. And even though they show symptoms, but we still see a huge variation in terms of their muscle strength when we actually test them. So the original experimental design is actually to only focus on this small group. But it's definitely a good point.
Can I follow up on that? The Wellstone, which is centered at UMass, is very interested in the type of situation that, can I use your name?
Yes.
That Don just outlined. Somebody who has a mutation, but is or a deletion that would predict more severity than they have. So we're looking at asymptomatic, non-manifesting carriers. I bet you didn't pick that up. Of the disorder. And listening to you, we when we both get a chance to analyze data separately, we certainly should compare, because we really may learn a lot from comparing data sets, and obviously increase the power by increasing the sample size.
Okay, we'll move on to.
Thank you so much.